Thank you. We're gonna get going here in about a minute. We're gonna get going here in about a minute or so, or very, very quickly, and see if there's anyone in the hallway straggling or still trying to come in. Thank you. All the speakers, you'll see a button on the device right in front of you. Press it to speak, and if you're green by your microphone, that means you're hot, and we can all be hot at the same time. So we went to New Baltimore's, I kept an eye on New Baltimore's town hall last week, and it was packed, and hence I thought we needed the room, so I decided to put us up here. Thank you. I'd like to welcome you to the Chesterfield Township Anchor Bay Water Levels Town Hall meeting. As you are aware, the Great Lakes Basin continues to be at historically high levels. The 2019 lake levels produced some of the worst flooding that Chesterfield has experienced in over 30 years. I am pleased to have officials from Macomb County, EGLE with the state of Michigan, the Army Corps of Engineers, along with a representative from Detroit Edison and members of the entire Chesterfield Township team here to provide information and to answer questions. Your local government is prepared, focused, and devoted to assist property owners and residents of Chesterfield Township. We have been and will continue to coordinate with all the agencies present here tonight, along with many more. This is truly going to be a coordinated effort, and it has been a coordinated effort, and we are all a piece of the puzzle. However, the most important piece of the puzzle are the residents and the property owners of Chesterfield Township. I want to thank you all for being here and for participating. And we're going to start with some presentations. What's going on here? Hold on, we got a technical. Just some of the pictures and videos from last year's event when this started, which was around May of last year when we started to feel some impact. That video could have been an hour long with the amount of impact and specific situations around our community. I recognize a lot of faces here that I saw last year, and I think you're going to see a whole lot of information. Quick overview of what tonight's schedule of speakers and agenda is going to look like. I've already done a welcome and introductions. I'm going to give a quick overview from a Chesterfield Township local perspective. Then I'm going to turn it over to Macomb County, which is the next level of government up, and hear from the Macomb County Emergency Manager and the Drain Commission, and speak a little bit about the Department of Roads, which are vital partners. Then we're going to turn it over to EGLE, representatives from the state of Michigan, for a presentation on high water in the emergency permitting process. Then we're going to move over to the Army Corps of Permits and have a presentation on emergency management, and along with regulatory, go to questions and answers. I will be cutting off the questions and answers for another presentation by Army Corps on the Great Lakes Basin hydrology water levels. And I'm hoping to wrap this up before 8 o'clock or around 8, but we will stay as long as it takes to answer your questions. Lake St. Clair is at a historically high level. The partner here in the data is going to come from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Again, at the end of this presentation is going to be a fantastic presentation from the Army Corps regarding how much data goes into historical and projecting where all of our Great Lakes are going to be. As of now, the website, their website is located here for public use at the top. As of 2/28, the water level was 576.80. And the data that they're going to share is just fantastic for projecting. The good news is, even though we are higher than this point last year, this year's in the red, last year's in the blue, the projections are looking to be very similar to next year, and there'll be a whole lot more on that when the Army Corps gives their presentation. Pat Cree is going to give a presentation here with U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, along with Buster Cowtown and Missy Cropfitter at the very end. Thank you. Predicting impact to our shoreline and property. Again, Army Corps, and Missy's going to give a fantastic presentation at the end. But another impact on this, besides the water levels and the information we get from the Army Corps, is the wind. As you know, a strong southeast wind, depending on what exact direction it's coming from, could impact different areas of our township pretty drastically. If it's coming right up a canal and happens to be the right gust of wind and the right stability, I'm sure there'll be a little bit more talk on this. It can take the elevation, which 578 is kind of a critical elevation in Chesterfield that I'll get to a little bit later, and it can turn it into 3, 4, 5, 6 inches higher just based on that wind. The hydrology behind that is fascinating to me, in that the flow out of the Lake St. Clair through the Detroit River is hampered by the wind coming out of the south, and at the same time you got wave action coming up. So it's not only a water level issue, it's a weather and wind issue. And a good service for that is the National Weather Service and any of the advisories that you see. Know if your property is at risk of flooding. FEMA, the flood maps you'll see out behind in the lobby here, floodplain maps along with some maps that are used to analyze elevations in Chesterfield in red and shown in red and blue. Those are vital maps. You can go to this website right here on FEMA's site, enter your address, and it'll pinpoint if you're in one of these floodplains and what your elevation is. In Chesterfield Township, our FEMA floodplain manager is Gary DeMaster, who is in the back of the room. Everything to do with constructions, alterations, reconstructions, that's where you start in our building department with construction and permitting only. Any insurance questions should be directed to your insurance agent. Be prepared for potential water level impact. EGLE is here, Bethany Paris and John Jones. And they have a website. This one's a little longer than what it is. I believe it's just michigan.gov/eagle/high water. It's simple, and I think it'll bring you to the same thing. They're going to be doing a presentation a little bit later in the program here. We're coordinating our efforts with Macomb County. Macomb County Emergency Management is here. Brandon Lewis is running a touch late, but he will be here in time for him to speak. If not, Lindsay Swan is here in his place, along with representatives from the Macomb County Public Works Office relating to the county drain system and some of our sanitary sewer. However, the sanitary sewer that is under their jurisdiction is generally outside of the impact area. Ken and Lara are here. Thank you. And we're going to talk about the Macomb County Department of Roads, which is another vital partner that we have to coordinate with as a township government. Report property damage. This is something that is requested by Macomb County Emergency Management. We have a property damage form that we standardized. The idea here is that if you have structure damage, send that information to us with your address and pictures and all the vital information. We will forward that to the Macomb County Emergency Management team. That information, if this becomes a substantial enough event where a state of emergency could become possible, either in the state or in the region, that information will be vital. Macomb County drains, I do want to talk about another vital partnership with the county. Chesterfield Township has nearly 50 miles of county drains, and every one of those drains lead to Anchor Bay. Please, we can all help by keeping debris and trash out of the drain easement and out of our ditches and out of our drains. The debris and trash not only could cause substantial pollution and damage to our environment, they also can obstruct flow, and they wreak havoc on pumps. A majority of the storm sewer in Chesterfield does flow with gravity through a ditch or a pipe. However, we do have some substantial pumping stations, and that trash and debris can wreak havoc on those drains. We're also working with the county, and I'm sure maybe Ken will be touching on that. For the last couple of years, we've been really working on getting rid of the obstructions in our drains, which actually helps. Even though some of these drains are way upstream and way inland, they are affected because the downstream water being so high, any impediment to that flow will cause upstream problems. Coordination with the Macomb County Department of Roads is vital as a township because townships don't own any of the roads. These are Macomb County roads or private roads. So we coordinate with them constantly on pumping of our flooded roadways when necessary, water over roadways, signage and notifications, and road closures if necessary. Areas of concern. This is some of the maps that, I got volume now. I didn't have volume that whole time. Some of the maps that you saw out in the lobby there. This is the south end of our township from Hall Road to Wand along the river. Some areas of concerns that we know exist. From a road perspective, a major road perspective is Rosso Highway east of Jefferson. Last year there was water over the road at that point. We expect it again this year on the curb. Two areas on Jefferson could potentially have a road impact between Hall Road and 21 Mile, along with Farwell Street in that area of the township. It should be noted too that everything in the blue could be affected by this water. That is a 578 contour line, and the contour line you see along the shore is a 581, which accounts for wind and weather issues. Everything in the blue could potentially be impacted. Moving south in our township from Wand to Forbes, a couple other areas that we know are going to be areas of concern coming up is Jefferson and Washburn, along with the entire area to all the way to the lake right about there by Fortin, along with Jefferson by the Anchor Bay pump station. This was May 1st of 2019 when we had a disruption to the Anchor Bay pump station, and that was the result for a couple of hours along Jefferson. Moving north, Forbes all the way to the New Baltimore line. The next area, a road-specific area that we know is going to be an area of focus is Jefferson at Lake Point. If you drove that last year, although probably didn't drive it a lot because the bridge was shut down all year, you would have saw a pump there all year by the Macomb County Department of Roads pumping the ditch down because the lake level in that, or the level in that area was approaching lake level. The road level was very close. And another area is at the end of Schneider at Bay Lane that we know is a focus area. Those are the major roads that we anticipate being impacted. Everything, like I said before, in the blue on the maps out there, and everything in the floodplain at the 578 elevation could potentially be impacted moving forward. Chesterfield Township team. So I kind of briefly ran over the federal officials, the state officials, the county officials, and the coordination. Our team with the Department of Public Works, Director Coddington is in the back, along with Assistant Director Johnson of our Water and Sewer Department, Joshua Sonnenberg with Facilities and Operations, our Building Department, Director Gary DeMaster and our Township Engineer Mitch O'Connor are all in the back of the room, and we'll be here to assist in answering questions as we move forward. And as we go through this, those are the individuals on the ground trying to assist. Along with our Department of Public Safety, Director Kirsten and Fire Chief Craig Miller. What we're doing locally, sandbag coordination. We have over 100,000 sandbags on hand at this point. We will have sand located at 3 locations, just like last year. We had the addition this year of a mechanical sandbagging machine to help coordinate the deployment and the filling of these sandbags, along with some easier filling devices to make it as easy as possible to get this service into our residents' hands. We're also trying to coordinate and gather as many volunteers and community efforts as possible to help those residents who either cannot or are unable to protect their property on their own. And we're asking them to reach out to us. We are doing the best we can to find volunteers to help with that effort. Air plugs and pumping of drainage structures. This is an important one because we have multiple locations in road basins in the right-of-way that are below the lake level, so hence our roads are flooding. The DPW last year and will continue to install air plugs to stop the reverse flow of the lake into our right-of-ways and roads. This will require pumping because now the rainwater will not be able to flow the way it's supposed to out into the lake. And we plan on continuing that effort this year. Our DPW will be continuing that. You see them, if you're out there, you may see them early in the morning managing the pumps and pumping down or on all hours of the night. And we anticipate over 15 locations of having to provide that service moving into 2020. Sanitary sewer system. The DPW and the Water and Sewer Department this late fall through this winter has inspected and raised, repaired, or resealed all township manholes located in the potential high-level impact areas, which is essentially anything that's in that 578 elevation range. This is very important, and we're fortunate in Chesterfield that our sewer system, we do not have a combined sewer system. The only thing that goes into our sewer is sanitary sewer that gets treated. If storm sewer gets into our sanitary sewer system, it presents many, many problems. One is overtaxing of that system, and we actually have to pay as a community to treat the rainwater. So under no circumstances, and I mean no circumstances with no exceptions, should a sanitary manhole or a sanitary cleanout be utilized to drain surface water. And I'm sure the county will touch base on this as well. If you see any drainage into a sanitary sewer, please contact the DPW. Some of this can be deliberate, and some of it can be accidental, whether it's a broken cleanout or a manhole that is knocked off its top. But I want to commend our Water and Sewer Department. That was a very important, great thing to do for our entire township. Our system is tight, it has integrity, and it's something that we will always and continue to be on. And we ask you just to be cognizant of no storm water in the sanitary sewer. Welcome, Brandon.
Thank you.
Be prepared for the threat of rising water, and I'm going to turn this part over to Chief Miller. Chief Miller.
Thanks, Mr. Supervisor. We did, in doing our research, we looked at what are some options for residents and homeowners so that we could put together a plan and how we could take care of things ourselves to minimize hazards and risks from the rising waters. Some things to think about ahead of time before the threat arrives. Take a look at moving furniture, appliances, and items out of low areas that may flood. Store items with family, friends, or off-site locations. To get more into it, and the research we got most of this from was from FEMA, which was getting this from the experience of other folks in other parts of the country who've dealt with flooding. Furnaces, electrical circuits, breaker boxes, outlet plugs and things like that. Consider, if you're in an area where they may flood, consider elevating them above the potential water line or even taking them out of service if the water starts to encroach. Put valuables in safety deposit box off-site. And another thing, which is a great idea, flooding or not, is take a point in your year and go through your home and take pictures or videotape it and store that somewhere safely. So in the event of a disaster, an emergency, or flooding like this, you have some documentation to use with your insurance. Also, any chemicals that may be stored in the lower part of the home, move those out of the way, paints, cleaners, and things. One of the big hazards we have with floodwater is it's usually highly contaminated. Shut off circuit breakers to lower areas in areas that you're not using. Turn off gas to hot water heater, furnace, or other appliances if they might be encroached on by floodwaters. Do not run gas-powered pumps or generators indoors. That's kind of common sense. We want to be careful not to allow carbon monoxide to build up in a structure and expose people. Communicate. Have a plan in place. Talk to your family, talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors about how you can work together. Notify your insurance agent early on. Advise them of the threat that's going on in your property and talk to them. And if the water comes into your home, this is time to think about relocating. If that takes place, then there's different things that are going to happen, such as if it affects the gas, if it affects the electrical in the home, secure your house, notify the township, contact us, use that damage form that the supervisor showed earlier on. We want to turn off power to your home, shut off your circuit breakers, shut off any gas appliances in the flooded area like we mentioned before. Keep out of the water as much as possible. Remember, there is the risk of not only chemical contamination, but if the water's cold, there's a threat of hypothermia. That's the chilling of your body temperature. And you don't think about it right away, but if you're in knee-deep water, moving around in your home trying to work or do something like that, or remain in your house, it can slowly start reducing your body temperature, weakening your immune system, making you sick, even to the point of severely injuring you. Notify the people on your list and contact your agent right away when the water gets to that point. Electrical hazards are one of the biggest concerns we have during flood times. Obviously, we want to stay away, and you may have a secured home. You may have your power turned off and everything's okay there, but the electricity can be creeping in from another source. Outside your home, a garage, another building somewhere nearby. The further away it gets, the lower the voltage, but you don't want to be anywhere near it. This can incapacitate you very quickly. And of course, the thing to think about electrical is afterwards, it has to be inspected by licensed inspectors and repaired by licensed contractors. We don't use electrical equipment that's been flooded. If it starts to corrode, it can become a fire hazard. Finally, natural gas. We spoke with the folks from SEMCO, who's our gas provider for Chesterfield here, and those meters that they have, if they go underwater, will do a large amount of damage. So we'll be talking with them early on. If there's a threat of encroaching into that equipment or possibly drowning pilot lights and affecting gas-powered appliances, SEMCO very might come out and start removing the meters because of reducing the threat of a gas leak. If those go out or malfunction, they start to leak, we could get a gas buildup, which could result in an emergency that we don't want to deal with. And like we mentioned before, the toxic tendencies of the water. Chemicals, acids, sewage, runoff, anything that could be in there, we want to avoid the water as much as possible. So remember, these things could be secured if things get bad. Electrical service, natural gas supply. We need to keep the water system safe for drinking. So one of the considerations the fire department has is if the water is high enough over hydrants, we can't hook onto them to fight fires with. We've got enough water around us. We'll use that water to fight the fire with. But the water coming out of hydrants is drinking water, and we have to keep that clean at all costs. Consideration of sewer system backups is another problem. And, of course, road closures might be an issue. So that's why we want you to consider relocating if things get to this point.
Thank you, Chief Miller, and I did add one more little check mark to the list you gave me, and that is to prepare for the potential impact on your animals and pets as well. Thank you so much. This is truly a coordinated effort. We're going to hear from the Army Corps and EGLE with the state of Michigan, Macomb County, along with the team in Chesterfield. However, the property owners and residents are the most important piece of the puzzle. I'm going to turn it over now to our next level of government up, Macomb County, and I'm going to start with Emergency Management Director Brandon Lewis.
Good evening, everybody. As Dan said, I'm Brandon Lewis. I'm the Director of Emergency Management for Macomb County, and I wanted to thank everybody for having us here tonight to address you before the flood season starts, because as Dan said, you're all the most important piece of the puzzle, and getting good information in your hands now before the flood season starts is going to go a long way toward lessening the impact of the flood season here in Chesterfield Township as we move forward through the spring and summer. So the role of the county in this process is we are here to support Chesterfield Township. In Michigan's emergency management process, all emergencies, all disasters are handled at the most local level of government possible. So in an emergency, in a disaster, it is Chesterfield Township's responsibility to handle that emergency or disaster with our support until it exceeds the township's ability to respond. I commend the township last year for being fully on top of this, and at no point did the flood season last year exceed the township's ability to respond, although we certainly did provide support from both the county, state, and federal level with the Army Corps of Engineers. So the emergencies and disasters are handled at the township level, at the most local level of government, until that exceeds their ability to respond. So I think the supervisor talked about that a little bit. Most contacts from township residents should begin at the municipal level and should be with the township, and we are here to support. So some of the things that we in the county emergency management program do to support your township officials is we are the township's designated emergency management program, and we manage the county's emergency operations plan that dictates how all jurisdictions in the county operate under a declared emergency, and we assist Chesterfield Township with developing their local support plan to our county emergency plan. We support the township with resources in the event that, they just need something that they don't have. It doesn't make sense in an economy of scale for every one of our local jurisdictions to necessarily own every single resource that we might need during a flood response season such as this one. So part of what the county does for the township is we help connect your township's government with resources that they may not have on hand right away, or that they may need access to that they don't necessarily have in their stock, or that the township doesn't own or can't get quickly. We assist with cutting through red tape to get the township those types of resources. We are the primary liaison with the state government, so most communications from the township to the state through the emergency management system funnel through the county. So we work hand in hand with the township to make sure that what you all, as the residents of Chesterfield Township, are telling your government representatives also gets up to your representatives in Lansing and up to federal representatives. We coordinate technical assistance with the Army Corps of Engineers, and you're going to hear a bit from them later. They are available to come out and provide support to homeowners along the water in flood fight measures, but those requests need to be coordinated through the township and through the county, and we assist the township in managing those requests. And I believe we talked a little bit earlier before I came in about the new damage form that you put together, and how you are all being asked to report damages as soon as you're able to the township. Well, what that does is that helps us put together good situational awareness for our state and federal partners, because in addition to working with Chesterfield Township, we're also working with the City of New Baltimore, we're also working with Harrison Township, we're also working with St. Clair Shores, I'm sorry. So we are seeing the big picture. We are getting all of these damage reports, not only from Chesterfield Township, but from the other lakefront communities in Macomb County as well, and we are helping paint that big picture so that we can advocate for all of you on the state and federal level. There's a very specific process that that emergency declarations and requests for assistance go through in the state of Michigan. As I said earlier, all disasters and emergencies are handled at the lowest level of government that they can be handled at. So hopefully in this case that will be the township, but should this flood season exceed the township's ability to respond, what they would do is declare a local state of emergency, and then we would work with the township to see that not only the township's needs are being met, but that they're being coordinated with our 3 other lakefront communities, and then we will determine whether the flooding along the lakeshore exceeds the county as a whole's ability to respond, and then the county then becomes your advocate at the state and federal level for potentially seeking additional assistance. At the state level, that tends to be in terms of public resources that may be available, pieces of equipment that can be deployed, personnel with technical expertise, things of that nature. And then if for some reason it got to the federal government, you could potentially be talking about funding, but these types of emergencies that we have, they're slowly unfolding. They don't happen rapidly. They don't happen right away. So we're probably not looking at federal intervention in this type of emergency, except for the technical assistance agreement that we have with the Army Corps of Engineers. So really, we'll be helping put Chesterfield Township in touch with any additional resources that they might need to bring to bear to help all of you respond to your flood issues in the field.
Thank you, Brandon. Next important partner at the county, because they own the drains and they're charged with responsing them, Ken Goyke and Laura Zakarski's here with Commissioner Miller's office. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. And yes, your old-time clerk, Gloria, her husband was my dad's first cousin, so it is a family deal. He just spelt my name wrong there. But on a serious note, it's very important. We got a really good relationship working with your township here. I'm in contact with Mr. Coddington and your supervisor, Dan, all the time on the issues. We have over 22 drains, and Dan alluded to it a little bit earlier, about 500 miles of drains. Very important to keep the drains clean. The history on the drains, you have basically 4 different types of drains you're dealing with in your township. You have waters of the state, which are your rivers and the lake, of course, and then some of the creeks. Then you have your county roads, which are not part of our department, but belong to the Department of Roads. And then you have private drains that are not designated. And then you have the county drains. The county drains all fall under Public Act 40 of 1956. And how that worked was the people in the water district that wanted to get rid of their water in a more controlled fashion petitioned the county, and then the county drew up the plans to improve the ditch, and everybody in that water district paid for that ditch to be improved and to do the drainage on it. So there is the history of how it actually started. And then when the maintenance is to be performed, if all the money was used up in that drainage district, the people have to petition to have work done on it. But under the leadership of Candace Miller, she has the county commissioners to appropriate a 50-50 match program, whereas the township just uses 50% and we use 50% of the county money, and that's what we've been cleaning the drains with, and we're making a lot of progress with your township. So instead of putting it onto your tax, which we have the authority to do without even a vote of the millage, except for the people in the water district, if they petition us, then it would come on, and let's say if the cost was $20,000 and there's 1,000 houses in it, would cost everybody approximately $20, but it goes according to your square footage and everything. So it's made in a very, very fair fashion to maintain the drains. But just knowing that work, how it works, I just wanted to explain that to give you a better perspective. But as Dan talked about a little earlier, not opening up your drains to go into the sanitary sewer, very, very imperative, because what happens at that point is now you're going to turn it into a combined sewer, and we have enough problems of the older communities that have combined sewer. A combined sewer is when the sanitary and the stormwater all go in the same one, and then it all goes to the sewer plant. Well, right now, your stormwater all goes directly, because of gravity, right out into our big basin, Lake St. Clair. This basin takes all of the water, for the whole east side of the state. It takes approximately a couple of months for even Lake Superior water to get down here, and that's why the rise is so high in July, because that's how long it takes for the water to get down, moving that way. Well, it works the same way in our county. Lennox Township and Ray Township and Bruce Township. Bruce Township is 100 feet higher in elevation than what we are over here, so there's no way you're going to stop that water from coming here, and it's going to, automatically go into the Lake St. Clair. So trying to control it is the main function of what we're trying to work with. And last year, one of our problems was, I think it was, what's that called, the Anchor Bay, that court over there. Your department here was, blocking off the storm because the pumps were just running on overload. And we get it dammed off, so it was getting convenient for some of the homeowners here to have water in their yard, but it wasn't nowhere near their house. And at night, they would knock it over. And then you're in chance of burning up the pumps. And it was a circle. And hopefully there was better communications that the homeowners would be a little better to help on them types of things. And another big problem that we're working on right now is the Meldrum drain. Because if the water gets up to 578, which is 578 feet above, sea level, and that's the number where it's actually doing the flooding here, we're going to have all those predictions that the supervisor was talking with. So, and then I'm going to turn it over. We'll be here to answer any questions. If you want to know if you're on a county drain or any other questions, we'll be here after for that. And then I'll turn it over, let you introduce Laura.
Laura Zakarski with the Macomb County Department of Public Works as well with soil erosion and permitting.
Hi, good evening. As Dan said, I'm Lara Saharsky. I'm the supervisor of the soil erosion department. Our role is a little different than everybody else's because we're actually an enforcing agency, and we're tasked with enforcing the state statute for soil erosion and sediment control where there's earth changes that occur on a property. So we have regulatory authority in general over anything within 500 feet of a watercourse, lake or stream. We have we do have a county ordinance that broadens that, but we're going to stick specifically today to your lake and streams. We have no problem with anybody putting in curb walls. We don't have a problem with anybody putting in sandbags. Permits will not be required from the Public Works Office for those activities. However, if you choose to raise the elevation of your property by bringing in fill, that would require a permit as well as building an earthen dam. We strongly discourage people from building dikes along the water's edge to protect their properties because if they're not engineered properly, you're putting yourself and your neighbors at risk for additional flooding. One of the important things that we want to make sure is occurring when you fill your property is that you're keeping your soil on your lot and not letting it run off. If it runs off into, say, a county drain, a stream, or even the lake, it decreases the ability for stormwater storage. So we want to keep that level. We want to keep those drains open. We want to make sure that there's no adversarial impacts onto the pump stations. Anytime you have additional sediment in a stream and that's a pump station, there's a pump station attached to it for drainage, it will clog those pumps. So we want to keep that water moving and getting where it needs to be, but we want to make sure that it's flowing cleanly. So if anybody has any questions about permitting or what would require a permit or not, I'll be outside after the meeting.
Thank you. The Macomb County Department of Roads is also very important contact between Director Coddington and Assistant Director Johnson. I feel like all hours of the morning they're in contact. They were unable to be here tonight, but they are a vital partner, and I did touch base with them a little bit in the beginning. I'm going to turn it over to Bethany Paris with EGLE.
Hi, with me today is, sorry. And we're going to talk about what EGLE's active role is with the high water. I'm going to go through these first couple of slides really fast because the Corps is going to cover it in depth, and it's way cooler than what I would say. So water levels are cyclical. That means they go up and down. There's cycles within cycles, and it takes a lot to predict them. Currently, the high water is at or near record levels. You'll see this graph again. Again, it's the Corps. What I just want to point out is in 2018 is the blue line, and 2019 is the red line. So those are our water levels and the difference within just 1 year. This is another graphic that's very telling. In the 120 years that we've been keeping track of rain and the levels of rain that we get, these have been the wettest periods out of 120 years for the 12 to 60 month period. So that's like 5 years. Has been the wettest that it's ever been. Consequently, the applications through EGLE have gone up. You can see in 2014 they were 254. Last year they were 825. Just 2 months into the year, we're already at 452. So we expect that number to go up a lot higher. So what does this all mean? I think you guys are more than aware that we have risks to infrastructure, risks to home, risks to property. And our role is specific in permitting to help you get through the permit process. We have an expedited permitting process now for emergency permits. We're going out to all these meetings, talking to people, putting names to faces so that you know who to contact. We redirected staff resources specifically to work on the Great Lake floodings. The emergency permitting, we're making it very clear that owners can act immediately to save your house or infrastructure, and that we're not going to go after you for a permit after the fact. We understand that you need to save things sometimes without going through the permit process. Then we ask that you just apply for it after you get it done. Everybody wants to know about flood insurance. You need to get flood insurance before you flood. Once you flood, you can't get the flood insurance. The other thing that we're doing is we've put out all kinds of flyers on the table out there with links to FEMA. We have a person, his name's Matt Acapenti, and he's the specialist for FEMA and flood insurance. We have links, we have phone numbers, we have all our staff on there. So you should be able to reach out and get a hold of one of us. In the expedited permits, we're looking at homes that are in danger, we're looking at infrastructure, we're looking at threats to human health and safety. When you apply for these emergency permits, you need to let us know. You call us, say, hey, I'm applying for this emergency permit. We will immediately review it, and you have to be willing to communicate back any information we may need so that we can get that out immediately. This is also another handout on the table. We have set up Great Lakes High Water Level webpage. We've also, at our Environmental Assistance Center, there is a person there specifically that is going to speak to the high water questions and that type of things. You have to identify, though, that you're calling about the high water and the emergency so that we can make sure we get you going in the right direction. as the water levels go up, so does the jurisdiction, unfortunately. I know that doesn't seem right, but if your project that you're going to do is going to touch the water, or it's over the water, or it's in the water, it's going to require a permit. We don't have any critical dunes here, and luckily we don't have any houses falling off of cliffs. So how do you begin the process? Also on that links, there's a link to the database where you apply for all your permits. You look and you talk to contractors. Talk to contractors who've been doing work for a long time. They're all have more work than they can do, but you need to be cautious about the guy that's coming in and just making the quick buck. So we say, you know, really, really vet your contractors. There's also on the website different types of shore protection that you can research, and number 3 is just that we're turning them around quickly. So here's another links. I know that you guys got like so many links now, but that is to apply for the permits, the top one highlighted. The second one is the permit staff across the state. We have included in the handout just our local office. We're out of the Warren office, and we cover Wayne, Oakland, Macomb, and St. Clair counties. Everybody wants to know what's the best way to protect their shoreline. The best way is to protect it before it becomes a problem, okay? I know that sounds easy to say from up here, but you want to avoid impacts to the resources. You want to minimize if you can avoid them. And then if you can't avoid or minimize, then we ask that you mitigate. We're waiving a lot of that on these emergency permits. We're waiving that you have to mitigate and that type of thing. This is the website, which is also over there, about the high water. It has contractors, lists of contractors that do work in the Great Lakes. We're not recommending anybody. It's just a list that we pulled off of contractors who've applied for permits on the Great Lakes. Sandbagging, it requires a permit to sandbag if you're touching the water. We have a minor permit, an emergency permit for that. Sandbags are very, very temporary. They don't hold up over a long period, and they can cause a lot of environmental impacts if they shred and disintegrate and end up in the water. So when we issue a permit for the sandbags, it's a conditional permit that you understand that it's not a permanent fix and that you will remove them. Finally, and I touched on this before, we have set up in our environmental assistance center an operator that is just taking calls on the high water. So if you need to get a hold of someone, there's an 800 number, there's a standard email that you can send to that'll go there, and they will help you. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Bethany. Thank you, Bethany. Bethany and John will be available for the Q&A in a minute. I'm going to turn it over to, or after the Army Corps of Engineers Emergency Management presentation with Pat Cooney. I'll run it down to you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Pat Cooney. I'm the emergency manager for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Detroit District. Going to run through some slides here about how we're supporting, what our authorities are, and hopefully at the end of our presentation, you'll know what we can and we cannot do. Buster will be jumping in somewhere in the middle there, but I'll cue you. How about that? So, how can we help? So we can help with immediate emergency assistance, which I'm going to get into a little bit, and we can help with the long-term solutions. So our authorities right here, Public Law 8499 allows the Corps of Engineers to get involved in before, during, or after a disaster. So emergency operations, rehabilitation of flood control projects that we've constructed or the locals have constructed, advising local communities on temporary flood protection measures, emergency dredging if needed, something like that, and if there are flood-related operations. Now that's just kind of a summary. There's full policy guidelines that go further than that I'll get into a little bit. So that's the top. On the bottom is the Robert T. Stafford Act. So when you see Hurricane Katrina type events or any other hurricanes, FEMA gets involved and they have the authority to basically hire other agencies to do what their specialty is. So very, very, very unlikely anything like that you'll see here, where FEMA would get involved and start hiring different agencies. That's, as you can see on television, the big, huge storms, or may have that experience yourself depending on where you have lived. So we're talking about the area where we're involved is Public Law 8499, so that everybody can remember that wonderful acronym. So the authority allows USACE to provide emergency operations support to communities. It's meant to supplement local resources, as Brandon said earlier. We can get involved when the township, the county, and the state are basically out of resources to help in the event. So we're here, and I'll talk a little bit about why we're here, and you can understand how we're supplementing. So as I said, they all must be exhausted or nearly exhausted before we get involved, and the request has to be done by the state. So you have had a request by the state of Michigan since last summer for technical assistance. That happened really quickly. One of the earlier counties to get involved actually was Macomb, and we've been out here since last summer, again, very much supported by the state. So erosion, probably several of you are experiencing that. None of our authorities allow the Corps of Engineers to get involved with protecting your property from erosion. So hopefully that's one of the big takeaways. So the technical assistance that I talked about that we're providing is we can provide review and recommendations in support of the local efforts on guidance on flood fighting techniques, emergency construction measures, inspecting what you have done in project and providing ways to improve it, provide different types of technical analysis, geotechnical evaluations, stream data, maps, historic flood, that kind of thing. And it's no cost to you guys. It just has to be requested in the right way. And everybody knows, Brandon knows how, the state knows how to do that. So those are all the different things we can do under technical assistance. How do we do that? We have a team of people as a collateral duty that work for the Corps. They have other jobs, they're engineers or accountants or whatever, but they're trained on how to go out in the communities and provide the training or actually provide to the local homeowner in their backyard, advising on where to put the sandbags, what elevation to go to, and that kind of thing. So current event, you are one of 19 now. There's one not up there. Counties in between Michigan and Wisconsin that we are activated to assist with. Again, typical assistance that we're doing right now are sandbagging and sandbag placement. So I'm going to breeze through this. There's literature out in the hallway on how to properly do sandbags, but is it hard? No, but there is a wrong way. So halfway full, you can tie it or you can fold it over, slap it down, and do it in a pyramid under a 2-on-1 type slope. And that's the basic layup. Again, there's a pretty detailed PDF printed out, flyer out in the hallway. So typical assistance we're doing, the top two are in Jefferson Chalmers area, actually the bottom right as well, and the bottom middle. The bottom left is actually Harson's Island. But we're out there doing a lot of things in southeast Michigan and all over both states, Wisconsin and Michigan. So the other type of assistance we can do is direct assistance. We can provide actual sandbags, plastic sheeting, HESCOs, but they have to be for public infrastructure. So those community buildings, those police department, fire department, critical public infrastructure, a hospital, something that's providing that community absolutely positively needs, we can provide we can provide the supplies to actually protect those buildings, but they have to be reimbursed to the Army Corps of Engineers for the cost of us to replace them. Quite honestly, we can get things a lot cheaper than you can because we buy sandbags by the millions, and we store them in different places all over the country for the different districts to use. So if there's a presidential declaration, then we don't require that reimbursement. So again, on all those supplies, we have them in Detroit area, plus other different parts of the state. They have to be picked up, but sometimes that can be worked out. If we're coming your way, we can just deliver them. I will hit here that we have been providing sandbags. I forget the number what we've given Macomb County, but we have some sandbags that are past the shelf life. They're still good, but we typically try to rotate our stock about every 20, 25 years. So we have been providing. We've been providing about 300,000 to the different communities for those types of sandbags that are free, and we don't care what you do with them. So it's not limited to public infrastructure. You can put them in front of your homes or protect your property, whatever you want to do. So you've heard probably the term advanced measures. That it's a bigger type program that requires different levels of approval all the way up to headquarters, Army Corps of Engineers. They're temporary type projects, technically feasible in preventing flooding. They designed specifically to deal with the threat, so just like we're in right now, and they're capable of being completed before the event's going to happen. So when peak water levels are expected next year, if we ever decide to move out on advanced measures in the state or anywhere else, we have to be able to know that that process is going to be complete and constructed before we can get to it. So project types, we've done advanced measures back in the 80s and a little bit in the 90s. I'm not going to read them, but those are some of the different types of projects we've done. Again, it is a long process. The basic, simplest estimate we do is about 8 months. It is 100% federally funded as long as there are things like that are temporary, like sandbags. But if you're getting into more permanent structures, there's a cost share to it, to the community. So again, advanced measures, imminent threat of unusual flooding, which you have, has to be for public infrastructure, so not for private property alone. Written request from the governor, and in that request, the state has to state how they exhausted their resources. A hard thing to do in where we're at right now. So can supplement the local, state, or tribal efforts. It has to have a benefit to cost ratio of over 1. So the cost of it has to be proven to that we're going to save more than the damages by putting that in. Engineering feasible. Temporary, it has to be removed by the locals, and there has to be no other core authority that can apply to that situation. So again, erosion can't be addressed, but there's a few programs we have under continuing authorities program that can provide some assistance on emergency stream back erosion, storm damage reduction. These projects are up to $10 million total. They take has to request from the local community, but they take a while. You're talking 5, 6, sometimes 10 years to get something like this in. So those requests should come in early, and the process should begin if the community determines there's something out there, and we have people at the Corps of Engineers that can coordinate some of that and can come out and provide more detailed briefings on how this all works. So, Buster.
Okay. Buster Cowton, I'm in the regulatory office with the Corps. Most you folks here in Macomb County are familiar with steel seawalls. That's probably the type of shore protection you're most familiar with. We have minor permits in place that will cover minor permits that will cover their repair or extension if need be, and similar to what Pat had said about erosion. If you've got a ongoing old seawall that's been in place for 40, 50 years and hasn't had anything done to it, and it looks like it's 40 or 50 years old, like that, That's not serving any functional purpose in our eyes, and we wouldn't allow replacement of that seawall in that alignment. So you're not going to recover any erosion in that regard. This is a more typical type of seawall shore protection we see up in Lake Huron and some places down in Lake Erie, riprap shore protection. Right now, I've got somewhere around 30 or 40 applications at my desk that are either for seawalls or riprap. And there are some minor limitations on our minor permit categories. This type of structure limited to a maximum of about 500 feet, 1,000 feet for seawalls. So if the individuals wanted to combine their efforts on a canal system or that sort of thing, repair or replace structure, there are some limits in that regard. One thing we try to tell folks, if you need to put your seawall higher than it is, if you're going to go up straight vertically, we're not going to require that you need a permit. But if you're going to angle it out from your seawall as a wave or splash guard, that is something that we're going to want to review. Say again? That's your last slide. Yeah, okay. That's basically all I have.
So key takeaways, near record levels. We're going to talk more about that. We're partnered with the Michigan State Police and with the county. Be sure that you are aware of the permits, and there are several programs that we can use that we can get with the community and discuss all the different programs we do. But as Brandon said, we do have a team standing by to come out and look at property to property to help the individual property owner. He already described kind of the process, rolled up those requests. He prioritizes us, and when we come out, and we'll come out and visit. Some of you may already have seen us out there last summer. I will be advised that, like we saw, 20 different counties, 2 different states. There's about 10 of us coming and going at any given time. So if you have that request to come out, roll it up, and then they'll prioritize it, and we'll come see you. There's the contacts for high water in John Alice, and Missy might trump me in a minute on who to talk to, but she's going to go next. And then anytime you need any information, you can email us on that lower right at our group email. That when you email that, it goes to 4 people in my office, so somebody will respond to it.
There we go. Thank you, Pat and Buster with the Army Corps. What I'd like to do is open it up to a couple of questions and answers, even though my little thing here went down, and then we're going to jump into the next presentation, which is absolutely fantastic, from Missy over at Army Corps, which is a global Great Lakes Basin. So if there are a couple of questions right now before we talk about the entire Great Lake Basin and hear this, easiest way to be heard would be to come up there. If not, you can speak loud and you can ask it to anybody here. What's your...
Joe Jakubowski, 46026 Jefferson, Chesterfield. I was wondering, I live in an area where the water floods over Jefferson, right between Hall Road and 21. We have an abandoned house next door to us. No one seems to want to do anything about it. That's where all the water comes in. Overflows onto Jefferson. It's either bank owned, I don't know. I was hoping the enforcement lady here, she said 500 feet from the water, your enforcement. What can be done to either the bank or the individual that owns the property so we can prevent what's happening to all the neighborhood around it? My question.
Well, I'm sorry, could you state your name one more time?
Joseph Jakubowski, 46026 Jefferson.
Thank you, Joseph. This is probably, and I would like some more input from some of the other officials up here. It's the toughest one that has been brought across to our township since I've been there, and that is neighboring properties that either are unable or unwilling to seawall, sandbag, or protect their piece, their parcel, which would affect a neighboring piece of property. And it's one of the most difficult ones because as a local government, as a township government, with a lot of input from our attorney in up every single level, a government cannot expend public dollars on private property. You do see some ordinances in some cities that have a little different authority than townships have. This township, with all the advice that we're giving, does not have the authority to enforce such an ordinance. So the route that we've been advised to take, and we are taking, is to do everything possible to encourage individuals to protect their property and to help them in any way, shape, in any way possible, whether that's find volunteers, vendors, and those type of resources. Chesterfield Township does not have the authority to do such a thing, and I don't know if any of the other agencies would like to comment on that, the county, state, federal level. Bethany?
There's no point where you guys cut off and someone else picks up that responsibility, so you just leave the people who pay the taxes in the area pretty much with their butts in their hands with nothing to do.
So I would move it up to the county and the state and Army Corps to comment on that as well. But the best advice I could give is to protect your structure first, then your property. When it comes time to protecting entire peninsulas, it becomes a little bit more difficult. I don't know if Bethany or if anyone else wants to chime in.
I was going to say at the state level, we cannot compel anybody to protect their property. So if someone has eroded shoreline, it's eroding your shoreline, it's a civil issue that you're going to have to take up in civil court.
So that, in other words, I have to sue.
Well, if we were to step in and do something, then people would complain we're overstepping our authority. You don't get a scream, come protect us, and then push us away later when you don't want us.
I just want to say something real quick. That's right, you're right by the Schmidt drain, aren't you, down there? Where we have a pump station pumping out there. Yeah, and the road commission, see, they worked within their authority to protect the road, and that's what they could do. So then it goes back to, your neighbor is pushing the water onto your property.
It's as simple as, the woman who lived there was 85 years.
With permission from the private property owner, volunteers and non-public funds could perform that type of work with permission to the private property. So there is a process there, and it just takes a little longer to go through. At the end, what it really comes down to is government cannot expend money on private properties at virtually any level, except if it reaches the emergencies where the federal government and Army Corps, correct me if I'm wrong, Pat, reaches a level where levees and seawalls and big projects get built. But it's that general premise, and it's very upsetting, but that's the reality of where we're at. Doesn't mean there's not a solution, and it doesn't mean you can't do it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joseph.
Y'all have a good day.
Any further questions from the public? Easiest probably if you come up, and I want to go like 5-10 more minutes, do the presentation, and then we'll start up with the questions again. Easiest if you come up to the podium.
Yeah, hi. I live in Chesterfield Township. To follow up on that gentleman's question, I don't understand why or what the limitations are for Chesterfield Township providing enforcement when I believe New Baltimore, St. Clair Shores, Harrison Township all have ordinances to protect the homeowners against a situation such as his. What makes Chesterfield so different than those three? Or am I incorrect?
Well, cities have a little different authority, and I can't speak to any other community.
Harrison Township.
I don't want to speak to what their intentions of their commissions doing that. What was your name again, sir, and your address, just so I can look at your, there's ways to solve these, and I will explain exactly the position that we're in.
Bob Brommer, and I'm on Nautical in Chesterfield.
I know exactly where you are. Passing an ordinance that would require a personal property owner to improve their property, or else township will enter that property and install sandbags and expend public resources, is not legal for our township. It is not enforceable for our township. It would send a message and potentially let those folks know that, or attempt to let those folks know that if they don't protect their property, they may be sued, or their personal property may be entered by our township. I believe it's a fugazi. I don't think it's real. It's a fake. It doesn't exist. Government cannot go on your personal property and take responsible for building a sandbag wall or installing a seawall on private property. If it's public property, it's a different story. When we talk about road right-of-ways and those type of situations. But now you can't solve it. You can solve it another way, but the ordinance will not do it.
I'm not asking the government to come in. I'm asking the government to say to the property owner, hey, you need to do something to protect your property and your neighbors.
And those are getting done with strongly worded letters when we know the piece. So I have your address, and when we know the piece, a letter will be written. We advise you to protect your property. If you cannot, or if you're unwilling or unable financially, then is when we start providing volunteers and resources to help that along. Sir.
Gary Genralik, 52624 Laurel Oak Lane. My question is a point of clarification to the Corps and the DEQ. If a person has a seawall, and let's use this podium as the front, if you put an I-beam on the top of it so it goes straight up, you don't need a permit from the Corps and the DEQ, is that correct?
That is correct for us.
Okay.
Yeah.
If it extends vertically, doesn't extend horizontally over the waterway, it does not require a permit.
But I've seen people in our township put an I-beam up straight so they don't need a permit. But other people, they've had a contractor put a splash guard up, which is a piece of steel that's welded to the top of the cap, but it has a configuration such that in a storm event, the water hits the shield and goes back towards the lake. There's still some spray that comes over the top, but part of the configuration, because it's usually like in a C shape or an S shape, might hang over the front of that existing seawall. So are you saying that person needs a permit?
That's correct.
Okay, but if they hook it to the top channel of their seawall such that the front plate doesn't extend beyond the vertical front of their seawall, they don't?
Correct.
So they have to configure it so that they don't extend lakeward of the front of the existing seawall?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Because people have done it both ways, and I think the people that maybe extended a few inches beyond the seawall wouldn't think that they really need a permit.
Policy.
Because it's like form over substance.
Understood. Policy with the district is if it extends over the waterway, it requires a permit.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to take one more question. We're going to do a presentation, and then we're going to open up questions again.
Perfect. James Weiner, 49904 Miller Court. 49900 Miller Court put in half the drainage we did, which is flooding out our home, which is overtaxing our pump. We put in 8 catch drains, one being the pump going into Lake St. Clair. We've talked with the building department. We haven't got anywhere with this, and this guy actually built, I have a picture of his driveway last time it rained. And what he's doing is flooding out Miller Court every time it rains. So what he did is he actually dug himself 2 ditches himself into one to go into a catch drain, which isn't working. So I need to know what I can do to keep his water off of my property, because I was told 100 times when we built this house 2 years ago, we moved in 2 years ago, and when we moved in, we got our final on this property, keep your water on your property. He's not doing that. And I need to know what to do, because do I call FEMA? Do I sue this guy? What do I do? He has 2 actual individual drains going from his driveway. Here's the picture, last flood, last drain. I have it. It's flooding out Miller Court. He's had plenty of complaints, but he got a final. Now, we were 6 inches off on one corner or something, and they shut us down. Next thing you know, we got a final because it was only 6 inches. Now, all this guy's water's running onto my property and flooding out my drain going into St. Clair, which then pops my electrical, which then floods out everybody. And I need to know what to do about it.
Thank you, James. It starts with the township. So Mitchell Connor back there is our township engineer.
Right.
I would contact him. I know that street very well. I drive it every day. And I know that exact low area, area that has water very, very well for the last 20 years that I've lived there. So it starts with get your information into Mitch's hands, our township engineer. We will start troubleshooting solutions if there are any, and then we might have to see if it's time to move up the ladder for permits and for improvements to protect your property.
How this guy got a final, I have no clue, because he's flooding out Miller Court. And I'm not the only one to complain. Neighbors to the right of him are complaining, and neighbors down the street, because they have to drive through this and walk through this.
If you would, be sure to give your contact information and phone numbers. Gary and Mitchell, and I will contact you as quick as I can. I don't know if any other of the agents would like to comment on.
Thank you.
Thank you, James.
All right, have a nice evening.
I'm going to move on to Missy Cropfritter's presentation, and at the end, we are going to open up again for some questions and answers. I got to give you the magic wand here.
Thank you, everybody. Some of this might be a bit of a review. I guess that's what you get when you go last, but it's all good information, and I think that's why you're going to see it more than once. So I'm a hydraulic engineer with the Army Corps. I've been with the Corps 12 and a half years, but I was an engineer for a consulting firm in Shelby Township for 9 years prior to that. Born and bred in St. Clair Shores and live in Macomb. So this is a near and dear issue that I've also grown up with, and I can only sympathize with those of you going through it. So I'm going to give a much broader scale of the water levels. I know everybody's familiar with them in their yards, what you're seeing every day, what you may have seen in the past 40, 50, 60 years. I'm going to broaden that scale again. As Ken alluded to, it takes quite some time from the water from Lake Superior to make its way down, and I think that's the perfect illustration of how large our basin is and what we are connected to. So on the left-hand side, that is the basin that our office is responsible for monitoring. We don't control anything, we monitor and collect data. Any bit of water or precipitation that falls in the blue or the green on that map on the left makes its way into our Great Lakes system. Our Great Lakes system, as shown on the bottom right, is a connected system. It is connected through rivers. These were carved out by the glaciers. So snowpack, anything that's going on in the UP or in far northern Canada is going to affect the water levels that we see in the spring, summer, and for years to come. I always like to show, I give this presentation quite often across the entire basin, and having grown up in St. Clair Shores, I always thought Lake St. Clair was the heart of the Great Lakes, and it is. But then I flipped the map on its side, and I saw it almost like a wide spot in the river, and that was like a dagger to my heart. But in the scale of what we are a part of, all of that water from Lake Superior, Michigan, and Huron comes through our lake. So we have to have that broader perspective of what's happening in all of the Great Lakes so we can get a better handle of what is happening in our backyard and why. So how does our office monitor this huge system? Well, first of all, we have wonderful partners in Canada. I am employed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, but I work with Environment and Climate Change Canada daily because the Great Lakes is 50% ours and 50% theirs. All of our gauges that we use for any data that you're going to see in my presentation or you've seen in previous presentations, it is coordinated ad nauseum. Centimeters and hundreds of centimeters are debated by engineers for days on end so we can give accurate information at all of those gauges across the basin. I'm not going to bore you with too much text. There are 2 points I really want to drive home on this slide. The levels that I'm going to discuss and anything that we have that we present, it is an elevation. It is not a depth. And the second thing is what's down there in bold. The primary drivers for water levels are natural factors. It's Mother Nature. So again, we have high water across the entire basin. This is just from, we go from Duluth, we go to the west side of Michigan, we have Lake Erie, and even all the way over in New York. It's the same story across the entire basin. Some of the forces of nature that we can't really see or connect with on a day-to-day basis contribute to the levels that we are witnessing at the current time. So for instance, lake effect snow. Back when levels were low, we were at record low levels 7 years ago. Water was literally, as you can see in that picture, evaporating into the atmosphere, getting caught up into snow, and being sent elsewhere. That's a natural phenomena. Evaporation, that is a very big factor in water levels. In the fall, typically, you would see evaporation, or evaporation occurs. If you could see it, this is what it would look like. You get the warm lake water, cool air that moves in, and evaporation, it occurs. It occurs over the lake, and that can cause levels to change. Bottom right-hand side, again, to draw your attention to, this is what is probably causing most of the issues, particularly on the maps that we saw in the very beginning of what was in blue. It is the SACE event. So yes, levels are high. They are at or near record highs. But when you get those strong southeast winds over here, you can have water level rises of 1, 2, maybe even 3 feet. And it has to wait until the winds subside for that water to find its equilibrium again. It is during these events that some of the most damage is occurring, and unfortunately, as you'll see in future slides, we are not expecting levels to drop drastically. Even if they drop to our lowest projected levels, the storms that come through with the wind will still be battering some of the shorelines. So this is what my entire job revolves around. It is the hydrologic cycle that we all learned in 3rd grade, and we have brilliant PhDs who have taken all of these components and broken them down into scientific models that we use to produce our water level forecasts, which there are handouts for, and I will go over in detail. But basically in the wintertime, we get the snow, everything's frozen, it accumulates on the land. In the spring, it gets warmer, it starts to run off. We get the spring rains, water levels start to rise. This is a little line of a typical seasonal rise and fall that I believe Beth had also discussed. We have seasonal rises, seasonal declines, happens on an annual cycle every year. What didn't happen this year was the evaporation. And I can show that in further graphs later on. So that pretty picture of what we all learned in third grade earth science. We then take in our office and we break it down into these components. And what we calculate in order to give accurate water level forecasts is what we call that net basin supply. So that red circle that accounts for evaporation, precipitation, and runoff, those are the supplies that we fit into our models in order to give water level forecasts for the next 6 months. So lake levels are high right now. This is about 100 years of data, and it is collected and coordinated with US and Canada. These are all monthly levels. The peaks and rises that you see, you have to look at the details, but it's the seasonal low, which usually occurs in the winter, and the seasonal high that it usually occurs in the summer. And you can see as we move, so the top is Lake Superior, and we move down the system through to Lake Ontario, you can see the relationship and the connectivity of our system, much like Ken had alluded to. What I want to point out, I know we're in a period of high water, but only 7 years ago, we were at a point of more than a decade of sustained low water. It was unprecedented. In the past 100 years, these lakes have been around for 10,000. I don't have the data set for that to draw any conclusions. But in the past 100 years, and in recent memory, we have seen record low levels, a record rise. So the rate of rise of those upper lakes specifically, from Superior to Michigan Huron, to go from record lows to above average in a period of 2 years had not occurred in our period of record over the past 100. We thought we were in for potentially average levels. And then the lakes kept rising, and we have set record highs on all of the lakes, with the exception of Michigan Huron at this point. Another repetitive graphic, but again, I think it's important to show that this is not just a Great Lakes event. This is a good more than half of the nation. That precipitation data that showed we've had the wettest 5-year period in the past 120 years not only extends to the Great Lakes, it goes past the Mississippi and beyond. This is a bigger, I don't want to call it an issue, but this is a bigger event across the nation. Everybody is saturated. Not just the Great Lakes, the drains in your backyards, the water tables, the inland lakes and streams, the connecting channels, the St. Mary's River, St. Clair River, Detroit River, they are all very wet, and there is a lot of water in the system. So here are some outlooks. I apologize, I already jumped to April. The top is actually the March outlook. I guess I'm forgetting about March right now, but it is actually March. These are some of the pieces of data we look at when we're producing our water level forecasts, because the forecasts depend on Mother Nature. So looking out for a month, what you see on the left-hand side is the temperature. So they're saying, the Weather Service is saying, we have a better chance of having above average temperatures. And as far as precipitation goes, this is where it gets a little dicey. We call it equal chances. So there's a 33% chance it could be above, it could be below, and it could be normal. They could just say we don't know. Right, they could just say we don't know. But what I can say is good news is when we were giving this talk back in February, they were showing very wet conditions. So there must have been some signals in some of the models, and now they're saying they're not pushing so far for it's going to be wet. But when you look out for 3 months, so that's springtime, which we already know is wet, they're saying it's still a slight signal that it could be above average through May. So all of this data we take, we put into our forecasts. Don't have to worry about seeing exact numbers on these. We just issued our forecast this morning. We do it at the beginning of every month. There are hard copies of it out on the middle table. It's an 11 by 17, and on the back of that you will also have that 100-year hydrograph. All I want to show here is pay attention as we flip through to that blue dashed line, the red line, and then those little hash marks at the top and bottom, and on the far right, that is our forecast. So the blue line is what we've seen over the past 100 years. Average data over the past 100 years. Red is what has occurred over the past 2 years. And that green dashed line is what we call our most probable forecast. So Lake Superior, flirting with record highs again. The top of that red hatch line is what we call our 5% exceedance, which means 5% of the time we could get supplies higher than what are most probable. So that is what we would call our worst case scenario. The bottom line of the red hashing is what we call the 95% exceedance. So if we get dry conditions, we could follow that bottom line. Let's keep our fingers crossed. We're going to follow that bottom line. So here's all the other lakes. As you can see, everybody's flirting again with record highs. And then here is Lake St. Clair's 6-month water level forecast. 2019 set record highs. So those hash marks that you see on the right-hand side, the horizontal ones on the top, those are the new records that were set. That green dash line does go above the record high for March, April, and May, but June and July, we're expecting to be a couple inches lower than last year, and that is what we call the most probable. So as I was listening, it sounds like 578 is the critical elevation. The 50% is showing for June and July, the peak summer level would be approximately 5 or 6 inches lower than that. But if we see really wet conditions, we would be just an inch or two above that. If it stays dry, we could stay about where we're at right now and come in a good 1 foot and 4 inches lower.
You guys were pretty accurate
Last year.
Could be better, worse.
Thank you.
Could be better, could be worse, could be the same.
Yeah, well, that's good to know because we didn't do well on Michigan Huron, so at least we got one of them. But what you saw last year is going to be very similar to what we're expecting for this year. We had a pretty dry February. We didn't expect that. So these numbers have come down a little in the past 24 hours. If we have a really wet March, I would expect to see them coming up an inch or two. So we also do this little fun thing of what's going to look like in a year. We can only go out 6 months. What about a year? And we play with a bunch of numbers. And basically, that red hashing is still, that's our 6-month forecast. We still believe, even in the best and worst case scenario over the course of a year, we're going to be well above average. So all the preparations and actions that have been taken locally, stay on them. This is not an event that's just going to disappear. Maybe in 2 years, just like we got to record highs, maybe in 2 years we could get back to average if we have very dry conditions. But in the meantime, it's going to be well above average. Living on the coast, don't even bother writing down that link. Just Google living on the coast, and you can get a digital copy of it. It was also in one of EGLE's presentations. This is my information. That is my direct line. That is my email address. Call us, give us a shout. One other thing, that I know the Weather Service isn't here. I've been on many panels with them. On weather.gov, there is like a contact us button. They're in uncharted territory right now issuing their lakeshore flood advisories. And I've been on many panels where they're asking people to please, if some wind events that are occurring are causing significant flooding and you're seeing that SAISH up on your property, give them a call because they're trying to work on their 24, 36, 72-hour forecasts to let you know and look at the wind data to say, hey, we've got a big wind event coming. We're going to issue a lakeshore flood advisories for such and such counties in these locations. They would like to see photos and times and dates of when some of this is occurring so they can get some ground truthing to their forecasts as well. That is the end of mine.
Thank you. Not very often you've got every level of government in one place, so I'd like to open it back up to questions. We also have a representative here, Stephanie Burris with Detroit Edison, because the electrical supply is also a very critical piece of the puzzle, especially for the structures that the water may hit the floor joists in your crawl space or basement, or your finished floor elevation. So any questions for this panel? I would love to hear some more. Advice I could give would be to know the elevation of your structure and know the elevation of your property. If you don't, reach out to us, especially if you're in the blue shaded areas on the maps that are out there or in the floodplain maps. Reach out to the building department, the engineering department here in Chesterfield, or ourselves, and we'll try to gather that information and help make some decisions. So if there's any further questions, we would love to continue to ask some.
Danny, I got one.
Okay, go. And then I'll jump
So, this is directed toward the court. What is our lake level, what is our elevation right now on Lake St. Clair?
It is 576.66.
Okay, and what is the highest you think it might go to with the numbers you're playing with?
The highest for our 6-month forecast is showing 578.1.
And our highest last year in July when we hit the all-time high was,
I'd have to dig and find that one.
Dan, do you remember what it was?
577?
It was, where I had our high level water tagged at was just under 578, just under that 578 number. However, with the waves, we ended up with the 578 map, which we see out there, and I'm going to try to get up here on my screen, was pretty dead on. Where water was over Jefferson, where water was inland upwards of an eighth of a mile or a third of a mile. So I think our high point was just under that 578 number. And I don't know if that's exactly what the data shows there, but there's some
I think if I remember correctly, it was 577.4 and change.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
that's
we're
about-
going by this 570, so at 576, and if we're going to 578, we're talking feet, correct, above sea level?
Yes, about a foot.
And
About a foot.
the lowest, but your highest with your figuring on your numbers or whatever, the highest we think could possibly go is 578 without a storm surges, I would say,
Correct.
or winds or something like that,
Yeah.
southeast, southwest winds, wherever you live along the Anchor Bay shoreline here.
Yes, and I only have 2 gauges on, that we use for the lake level average that's on our website. We only have 2 gauges for Lake St. Clair, but if anybody has information, it would be interesting to see what that maximum SAISH could be, because I know, for instance, on Lake Erie, we've seen 6 feet. Granted, it's a much bigger lake and has a bigger fetch, but if you get the right conditions, you could have more than just 6 inches during a SAISH event on the shoreline.
Okay, we scared away our,
So we're at
I'm sorry, what was your name? Oh, that's it.
47978 Jefferson. So trying to figure out how to do the sandbagging, Googling it, we found a bunch of different ways. So just what is the best way? Like the pyramid, the brick wall? How do we do it?
It's certainly not a brick wall.
Don't do
So,
the
no,
flat.
always the pyramid, and I understand sometimes you're space limited, you just got to do what you got to do, but the pyramid method is certainly the best way. And that if you follow the guidance from the brochures outside, or if you get on the list for through the county, we can come out and help you out. And we preferably would like to come out to see several homeowners at one time because of our resources are stretched, but we'd be happy to get on the list to
And
come
do you
out.
do it right up against the house or leave some room?
Typically, we would leave some room in case you have to do some pumping later on.
Okay.
So, yeah, you try to step it out, but again, each situation is different. Every property is different. Every property has like sheds and barns and boathouses and stuff that we got to go around, so. Yeah,
How far out are you guys if we put in the request to come out to do like the evaluation?
we can be out in a couple days.
Okay, great. All right, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Ralph Tranahan on Maple Ridge, 26553. Excuse me. Has it been determined which areas should be sandbagged?
Yes. Ultimately, it's going to be up to the property owners, but anywhere, and you see a little section of the map here on the screen, anywhere that's in blue on that screen, and there's bigger blow-ups of our entire shoreline, anywhere in blue on that screen represents what a 578 water level would look like, in which properties it would impact. So if you're in that area, I believe you should start assessing your property elevation and then your structure elevation, how high up from your property your finished floor is, your basement, crawl space, things like that. Those are the areas that should be sandbagged. Now, the focus areas our public utilities, our roadways, and we know where those elevations are. We saw them last year that I ran through at the beginning. And I would reach out to, again, the building department engineer or myself with your address, and we can do the best we can to nail your property and your structure and troubleshoot some solutions for you.
The floor drain, the floor drain runs through the back of my property. 30 years that I've been there, it's never flooded, other than maybe 3 or 4 inches on the flat part of that drain, but it quickly drains the next day. And I was wondering if that had any, has that been targeted towards being sandbagged at the floor drain?
The fuller drain?
Yeah.
I would get your address and I'll put it on, I have to nail that exact address and I can pull it up on a map for you and compare it to our projected water elevation or worst case water elevation and see that. So depending on where that is, and I can either grab your address now and try to plug it in and zoom it up, or we can reach out to you after. Some of the drainage, 26553
Maple Ridge.
Maple Ridge?
Right.
It's right over here.
So some of the drainage issues could very well be just that, drain issues and not high water issues. They could be another issue. Maybe I'll turn it over to Ken for comments if he has any on that.
Without looking at the map to see what the elevation is, I think most of you people over there are pretty decent for that 578 level, because you're basically just west and a little bit south of the township hall right now. I've done some work on that drain. Had some beaver problems there this winter that I had to dislocate to help the people on the other side of 94, because there was flooding issues over there.
Okay. Yeah, so you are on the other side of I-94 and not at this elevation issue. It's a drain issue. Reach out to us and I'll connect you into with the county and see if there's anything that can be done. The drain drains into the lake, but your elevation is higher there. So, and the drains are designed in many instances to hold water, and all that's basically part of the equation. But you are not in a zone that is under imminent risk, I guess, from at least high water. I mean, maybe from a rain or a weather event or human obstruction type event or failure. Any further?
Tom Hauk, I'm at 48454 Harbor in Chesterfield Township. I'm new, I've not lived here very long, but I had one question. Does Chesterfield Township have a weather monitoring station that would include water levels and things such as this that's available in real time?
We do not. We do that. Most townships and cities don't have that. However, our team tracks that constantly. So there are benchmarks throughout our township in a couple of drains, one of which is the edge of the meldrum has got a tape measure on it. So we know when it hits on that measure, and I went by every day, sometimes 2-3 times a day, and so did the rest of the team, to try to determine what that level was. And we tracked that daily, and then we took that data, looked at our maps, and said, we're about to have a problem over Jefferson in this location because the water's hitting at 577 6 level or 578 with waves. And we were actually very, very well prepared and accurate. We knew when water was going to start breaching Jefferson by Meldrum. We knew when water was going to start causing problems at Schneider. We only got surprised a couple of times this winter. On Bay Shore and over by Wabash or Wabash over with the wind coming out sustained from a direction that flooded some internal roads that we had to pump down, but we did a pretty good job with that.
So do you think it would be good to have a community weather station that would maybe monitor water levels, wind directions, wind speeds? What you're talking about is manually somebody's going out there and keeping track of this?
I don't know if Noah could speak to the weather buoys that are out in the middle of, those resources are already there. There's buoys out and around. I've never been asked that question.
Nothing specific to Anchor Bay and Chesterfield Township. So when we get onshore winds, the speed of the wind, the surge doesn't come until, the wind's been sustained for a while. And I've not lived here very long, but I can't find any resource where I can get any information that is specific to this area as far as wind speeds, wind directions, water levels. These aren't difficult things to monitor, and it shouldn't be a very expensive station to put in. And I think with the high water level now like it is, having something that the community can check into and see in real time might be a valuable asset, especially if it were on the township website.
Thank you, Mr. Hawk. There are a lot of resources to nail our elevation and wind speeds and all that, and I'll be sure to reach out to you, and it might be worthwhile to explore the feasibility of something like that. That's the first time, and I've had a lot of questions. I haven't had a township question like that, but it's worth exploring. I feel very comfortable though with the data from the weather buoys, NOAA, and the oceanic weather situation.
But those are all well out away from the township, away from Anchor Bay. And what I've seen, and maybe I haven't lived here long enough to know, but I've seen that the wind direction and the wind speed can quickly bring up the water level along the shoreline. And anything that I can find online doesn't really pertain to the local events. It's stuff going way out in the middle of the lake or in Lake Huron or Lake Erie, and the wind directions around here are fairly, they're not widespread. We can get onshore winds coming across Anchor Bay, and you can go 5 miles down the road and the wind direction is slightly different. And I think a resource like that would be a nice resource for the community to know, and particularly like the water level in the canals when it's going up and down. There's a lot of people that use canals on a regular basis, and knowing what's going on out there. I think a lot of boaters would want to know in the morning or in the evenings what the water levels are. So I just think it's a nice resource, and it might be something the township should consider to have some weather station, water level station that's specific to Chesterfield Township.
Thank you.
I can just add very quickly though. As far as the core gauges and all the gauges I showed up there, the big ones that we use are obviously St. Clair Shores and Bell River in Canada. However, when we're looking for the same information, Weather Underground is a great resource. Not official data, but it really gives you localized personal weather station data. And then another one that I have a shortcut to on my work laptop is Dark Sky, particularly for wind. They almost give like a national map forecast.
But are those, do you find those are local to Chesterfield Township? The data, I've been looking, and the data, they'll tell me wind speed is 14 miles an hour, and it's 30 miles an hour at my house.
Yeah, I'm not specific to Chester, but I know there's thousands of stations in Macomb County, so it might be worth checking those too.
Of weather stations?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. But public access.
We don't do, that's NOAA. Yeah, Coast Guard, others. I'm sorry? I have not used it, I have heard of it. Yeah. So yeah, that's a great one, Wind Alert, and that sparks, the other shortcut I have is weather.gov. You just look up, and Selfridge's data will come up. I mean, that's another really good one. That's maintained and operated, but there is not water level data.
That did bring up another topic that Trustee DeMink, I know, has been actively involved with ever since we've started this high water event, and that is trying to find tools for Macomb County to set the no-wake areas and to try to push that wake zone back and to make sure that the Sheriff's Department, who enforces those no-wake zones, and people are cognizant that a 600-foot back with a big wake could be causing substantial damage. And I don't know if you want to comment on that, Trustee DeMink.
Yeah, currently, the wake laws, unless they've changed, Chief Kirsten, you might know it better than me, but St. Clair Shore is at 600 feet offshore. So for 14 mile down to Ford's Cove, you have to be 600 feet offshore for slow no wake. St. Clair Shore city ordinance. The rest of the areas around our area, it's 100 feet offshores. And I've lived around here all my life. So that's one bad thing. I have got a hold of Senator Lucido. He was here a couple of weeks ago. I mentioned it to him. I mentioned to him a year ago, they need to, for all the lakes, Huron, Michigan, everywhere else, they need 1,000 foot, especially with this high water. I know up in the Middle Channel, St. Clair Flats, it varies 200, 400 feet, but that's within the channels. But I've been pushing for it. I'd advise residents to get a hold of Senator Lucido because it's got to be state action. So it hadn't gone anywhere. I mentioned it last year. He was here a couple of weeks ago for a coffee meet. Clerk Berry had him here. But those are ones you got to get a hold of legislatures because it's got to be legislative action. I asked our township attorney if we could adopt an ordinance for something like that. He said, no, we cannot. But I think that's a major one. Anybody that lives like Private Shore, Harbor Drive, Goulette's Point, Point Lakeview, it's a big thing. A lot of these boaters, they don't care, and they fly too close to shore, and 100 feet's not enough now with the high water. So, I mean, I would definitely have you mention that, or contact Senator Lucido, or what's the state rep's name, Dan? Pam Hornberger, for legislative action. But that's it. Dave? I understand that, and that's all enforced by the county, and they do their manpower. That'd have to be taken up by the chief when get authority with the sheriff, so I can't answer that one.
We've got a little more time, and then that will be breaking up, and I'm sure that all the folks will be here outside to answer any additional questions. Yeah. Name and address, please.
My name's Richard Markham. I live at 47760 Harbor Drive. We live on a private street, and we did our road in 2004, and all our drains go out to the canal. So in other words, the canal designates what the water is on our street. And we were flooded on both sides of the bridge last year, and even a few other areas coming out of the sewers. We had to put plugs in, put sump pumps in, and all our drains go out there. Even Jefferson was flooded at Man, which the township came out, put a plug in, and it drained it. And we put a pump in, and it worked. Anybody got any information on pump stations that if we plugged off all our outlets going, we got 12 outlets going to the canal. Our street's 1 mile long. Has anybody got any information on putting in a pump station and like where to get it at, or who would ever be doing something like that?
It would be resident driven, so because it's a storm sewer situation, and again, we did have to. If you at the very beginning, some of my pictures were that Man in Jefferson Road intersection. So yeah, not only were there were plugs in there to keep the water off of Man with pumps, but sandbags around those structures. So pump stations might not solve your problem. And it would start with a request from the district. In this instance, it'll be the Harbor, that Harbor Drive area, to see if there's a design possibility that would solve this. And then it's a matter of working the feasibility, the cost to the residents. It would have to be a special assessment district and the benefit, I guess.
Right, and we already put a bag in on Jefferson. We didn't have a bag there. If we took the bags out, and the township actually took their bag out like maybe in October, we took the bags out in, I believe it was November, and Man and Jefferson already flooded 3 times. We got a bag in there and a pump right now, keeping the water off of Jefferson, because it was all the way on Jefferson.
So,
And we have about 15 locations around the township with pumps and plugs in the storm sewer. They had to be pulled in the winter because we don't know how hard it's going to freeze, and in that end, and come spring, I think you'll start seeing those going back in and maintained by us sooner than later. So reach out to us, and I know the street very well. It's in our area of concern, and especially that intersection of Man and Jefferson.
all right, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Volunteers?
Yes, we do. We could start back. Director Coddington is coordinating the entire sandbag operation, and he's right in the back, and he'll be here after. Hello. Welcome.
Hi, Joe McMillan, 49826 Miller Court. First of all, I'd like to thank you very much for hosting this event. It's been very informative. One question I had, I've lived here since 1985, been coming out here since the early 70s. We're hearing a lot of good things tonight about, things people can do, but, it seems to be pretty much relying on hundreds and hundreds of people all doing the right thing and hoping their neighbors do as well. I recall, just a little bit of history, but I do recall in the 70s when, and I was a young kid, so I didn't really care who did it, but somebody came in and they put up dikes all along the shoreline. And, it was highly effective. You knew that, everybody was participating. And it was just a short-term measure. It didn't appear to be real expensive, but it was, it really seemed to be the way to go as opposed to all the slapdash, hope it works stuff that we're trying to do now. And I'm just wondering under what circumstance, who did it, under what circumstances, is that effective?
So, Pat Cooney, Corps of Engineers, what you're describing is something that happened called Operation Foresight. It went back in the 1970s, and there was a period, and if you had the hydrograph up, I love talking that hydrograph, it tells a great story, but there was a period where the locals, the states, and the Corps noticed that there's a significant increase of water coming in that was rising up. So the local governments, so state, local, U.S. Congress, senators all got together and petitioned the Corps of Engineers basically to use the Public Law 8499 authority to provide a larger scale support to the states. So that, what you're talking about under Operation Foresight, 72, 74, we put $26 million worth of work in over 8 different states. Some of those crib dikes you're probably talking about, they're metal framed and board sides, and they filled them with sand. Some were actually berms. Some was just giving out, hundreds of thousands of sandbags on a self-help type of thing. So that program did exist back then. It doesn't now. But what was key there is 8 state governors and their elected leadership got together and said, we want to do this, and the Corps was able to respond with that program. It was very fast moving. Some of the projects were contracted by the Corps of Engineers. Some of it we just gave funds and materials to the locals to complete themselves. So that did exist, and it has happened before.
Okay, I just know that this problem is certainly more than Michigan. We see it on the news every day. Yeah. And I would hope that our, I guess we start with our, the state people. But, if you can reach out to the other states and maybe get something going, because, the forecast doesn't look too bad for this year. I hope it comes true. But, and I know the Corps of Engineers can't really forecast this. But, it was record high last year. It's going to be about the same this year. But there's nothing on the 6 or 12 month chart that shows that it's going back down, because it's probably not predictable at this point. But it seems like it'd be a good proactive step to take, that if we see that the water levels aren't coming down after this year, that, we get organized to do something a little more organized and effective. Thank you.
So I'd like to add one more thing. So advanced measures I talked about is a tool for that, but what you're dealing with advanced measures, why they die a very quick death, is not everybody wants a berm across their property. They want to be able to see the lake. Not everybody wants a rock crib dike going down the middle of their property or down the middle of the street. So it takes a collective community effort, full supported by the communities, for something like that to happen these days. So back then they had it, you'd think it would be able to do that again. So.
Come up to the podium, and then I'm going to see if anyone on the panel, or we have a lot of team members scattered around and some other elected board members. I want to see if they have any closing comments and statements, and then I urge anyone to hang around here for a little bit and pin any of us down individually, so long as people are hanging around. Name and address, sir. Welcome.
Dan Cordy, I live at 46144 Edgewater. The last house, it's the Lottie Schmidt property it's over a 100-year-old house. So I'm way down in the hole in all the new houses that have been built around me for the last, I've been out there like since 73, all the houses have been built with the new rules that you got to be above the floodplain and all that. So whenever it rains, even like with the snow melting, I get everybody's water from the whole 3 houses across the street of the neighbors. So as far as my situation, as far as me to raise my grade, I have to spend $1 million to bring in dirt because I have 2 lots, 179 and 180, in a big corner lot. So basically last summer when the water was high, the water was coming through the seawall into my yard, and there was times I couldn't even cut the grass because the whole yard was underwater just from the whole, of the water that's sitting in, the water sits its own level. I'm a retired plumber, and my ex-partner over there, Ron Barnes, I see sitting, we went to apprentice schools together. We've known each other for 70 years. How you doing, Ron? Good to see you. So anyway, that's my situation, and basically I have 250 foot of seawall on the whole corner, and that was all put in probably 45 years ago. So over the course of time, with the waters up and down, you get the water low in the canal, so the water, it freezes and pushes the seawall out. And you can see the pictures there that pretty well that's the situation of my seawall in the ground it was frozen inside of it. And I measured from the floor of my house probably last fall, and I was 27 inches to the water that was in the crawl space. As far as me pumping it out, I'd be pumping it out and recirculating it constantly. I'm a plumber, I know how things work, so basically I'm just telling you my situation. I'm laid down the hole, there's not much I could do except maintain and hope God doesn't give us a bad summer this year, Guess we should pray to who's the saint of high water? Father Salawas, he'll maybe do us a favor. So that's my situation, just so I bring it to your attention.
Thank you so much. And I do know that area. It is, if you look over here on the map, and it is out there. You are in the blue and edge, so you are below that 578, and probably even quite a bit below than that. Yep, the pictures are making their way down the on the dais. Hello.
I just had the same question. I have the same problem he does. On the low property, it was built in 1937, so the crawl space is constantly, the water in the canal is higher. It's coming up through the ground. You know what I mean? Into the crawl space. How do you stop or control other than pump it out constantly? Is there a solution?
There's always a heavy civil construction solution. It's just a matter of how feasible financially that solution is. So it starts with make sure we have your address, the team, and we can assess it and look at it for you and give you some advice and options.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Paul Belbot, 29356 Juan Drive. How you guys doing? Just a couple questions. So currently, from the last flood, we had to evacuate. If anybody was wondering who won the lottery for the lowest house in the township, that's this guy. So because we're on a private road, we're going to be having construction happening probably soon here, at least to get some things started, because we cannot file a second claim unless the first claim has been submitted. If the water starts to go over the road and is blocking construction, that's really going to halt certain things depending on when that could happen. The lot next to us doesn't sandbag. I have reached out to an attorney to see if I can sandbag to prevent the water from coming over the road, and he does not recommend that. So what are our options on a private road to be able to try and keep the road dry, just so we can get construction equipment in?
Every situation's different, and Army Corps would be one with Pat to walk that specific situation, and he probably was walk last year. So some are much easier solves, like a plug to make sure catch basins aren't coming up. Some are a lot more difficult because the entire road could potentially be under 577 or 578, and hence you got to sandbag the entire road, both sides, and then hence you can't access driveways. So every situation's going to be different. With the information that we have, could it be worse than last year? Yes. The projections are that it's going to be very similar to last year.
Okay. Two quick things just to help anybody that's going through this too. Don't talk about to an insurance company the water table being high. They don't care, and it'll hurt you. So the water always should be coming over the seawall. If it's not coming over the seawall, it's caused by rain. That won't help. So the water table will be high this year. Any flood claims that you guys have to make, just don't use that. They will immediately shoot you down. All right? Thanks, guys.
Thank you. I want to make sure anyone on the panel doesn't want to make any closing statements or comments, and then or anyone else on the team who's in the audience. And I'm sure that I want to thank everybody for coming. We are as prepared as we can be. We're focused and devoted to try to assist in any possible way that we can under that's legal. Making sure that we do not, as a township government, expend public funds on private property. That doesn't mean that there's not solutions to the most difficult problems, and some of them may not be financially feasible. But the most important piece is the residents, and I really appreciate all the questions and the cordialness of the conversation. I would just urge you to reach out to our office here at the township first, like Brandon so eloquently said it, all problems are local, and then we'll punt them to, if necessary, to the road commission, drain commission, state agencies, and ultimately the federal government if necessary. So thank you so much for being here, and especially thank you to the entire panel that participated, and have a good evening. Thank you.